The courtroom was silent, a silence heavy enough to crush the soul of the city. Socrates stood there, barefoot, hands folded loosely behind his back, as if he were greeting an old friend, not his death sentence. Around him, Athens, the proud city of reason, had turned into a theater of accusation. They said he was corrupting the youth, that he disrespected the gods, that his questions were poison to order and peace. Yet as the jury pronounced their verdict, he did not tremble. Instead, he smiled, that small, knowing smile that disarmed fear itself. "You think killing me will silence truth," he said softly, "but truth cannot be silenced." That moment, in the shadow of death, he mastered something no insult, no injustice could ever touch, the art of remaining free within himself. And perhaps that is where our story begins, not with victory, but with calm defiance, with the courage to let the world misunderstand you and still stand unbroken. This is Socratic Spark, where ancient wisdom meets modern success. If you love timeless lessons and powerful motivation, hit subscribe and let's grow together. The dust of Athens still glimmers in imagination, a city of marble, logic, and restless debate. But beneath its beauty, there was fear. The kind of fear that awakens when one man begins asking questions too honest, too uncomfortable, too dangerous. That man was Socrates. No crown, no army, no wealth, only questions. Questions that pierced through pride and left even the wisest of Athens exposed in their own ignorance. And yet, centuries later, his voice still speaks, not from books, but from the silence between our own thoughts. Because every time we doubt ourselves, every time we wonder what truth really is, every time we refuse to follow the crowd just because everyone says so, that's Socrates whispering again through the corridors of the soul. He was condemned for corrupting the youth, but in truth, he was liberating them. He was accused of disrespecting the gods, yet his reverence for truth was itself divine. And when death came for him, he did not curse his judges. He drank the poison as calmly as one drinks water after a long day's journey. For him, death was not defeat. It was a final dialogue, the last question. Socrates once said, "The unexamined life is not worth living." That single sentence tears through time like lightning through a dark sky. It is not an idea meant for scholars alone. It is a mirror for all of us. Because to examine your life is to risk seeing what you truly are, not what the world told you to be. It means to strip away the comfort of certainty, the armor of ego, and to stand naked before truth itself. He taught that wisdom begins with knowing your ignorance. That real strength is not in winning arguments, but in mastering the self that reacts to them. To live as Socrates lived is to live with dangerous honesty. To care more for the health of the soul than the applause of men. Today, in a world overflowing with opinions, shouting, and false certainty, Socrates feels more alive than ever. Because we have knowledge without wisdom, comfort without courage, and communication without understanding. He would look upon our age not with anger, but with his quiet smile, the same one he wore before death, as if to say, "You have built great cities, powerful machines, and endless voices, yet how many of you truly know yourselves?" And so, this is not just a lesson about history. This is an invitation to sit once more in the marketplace of Athens, to walk beside the old philosopher as he questions everything you believe to be true. If you listen long enough, you may find that the greatest defense against insult, fear, or failure is not pride, but peace, the kind Socrates carried to his final breath. The streets of Athens were never silent. Merchants shouted, poets argued, soldiers boasted of battles long past, and in the middle of that noise, an old man stood quietly, asking questions that stopped people in their tracks. What is justice? What is courage? What is good? His voice was calm, but his questions carried the weight of thunder. To question was not rebellion in itself, it was revelation. Yet in a society that prided itself on knowing everything, the man who asked why became the most feared of all. That man was Socrates, barefoot, poor, without a title or weapon, yet powerful enough to make the mighty stammer. He did not teach by giving answers. He taught by making others think. Every conversation with him was like standing before a mirror that showed not your face, but your mind, stripped bare of illusion. He believed that courage was not in the sword or in the crowd's approval. It was in the refusal to surrender your reason to the comfort of belief. To question the world, even when the world despises you for it. That was his act of war. In the marketplace, young men would gather around him, curious, amused, sometimes offended. He'd ask them, "You say you desire success, but do you know what success truly means?" They'd laugh nervously, stumble through answers, and in that laughter, Socrates saw the sickness of his city, people proud of opinions they had never examined. He once said, "I am not wise, but I love wisdom." That was the heart of his courage. He dared to be ignorant, publicly, joyfully. He showed that true strength is not pretending to know, but having the humility to learn. When the powerful men of Athens saw how deeply his questions unsettled the youth, they called it corruption. They could not tolerate a man who turned their certainty into dust. But Socrates smiled. He always smiled, because he understood that truth, once awakened, cannot be chained again. And this is where courage begins, not in defiance of enemies, but in defiance of self-deception. Every time you question your own motives, challenge your fears, or admit your mistakes, you are walking the path of Socrates. For it takes more bravery to face your own ignorance than to face an army. So when he was brought to trial, accused of crimes he did not commit, he stood before the jury not as a victim, but as a mirror. "If you fear truth," he told them, "then killing me will not save you. It will only prove me right." That is the courage to question, to stand unshaken when the world demands your silence, to choose understanding over popularity, and to guard your soul even if your body must fall. Because in the end, courage is not found in fighting others. It is found in refusing to lie to yourself. Athens called him a fool. They said, "Socrates pretends to know nothing. What kind of teacher is that?" But in truth, his confession, "I know that I know nothing," was not ignorance. It was awakening. In a city overflowing with talkers, Socrates chose silence. While others boasted of knowledge, he searched for honesty, the kind that starts with admitting how little we truly understand. He knew that human pride loves to wear the mask of wisdom, and behind that mask hides a disease of the soul, false certainty. He would walk through the marketplace, listening to orators, craftsmen, and politicians. Each one claimed mastery of justice, love, virtue, truth. And yet, when Socrates asked a few questions, their certainty began to tremble. "So you say you know what justice is?" he'd ask. "Then tell me, is justice what benefits the strong, or what honors the good?" Their words would twist and stumble until even they no longer believed themselves. He didn't humiliate them. He revealed them to themselves. That was the paradox of Socratic wisdom. He knew more than the wise men of Athens precisely because he did not pretend to. He understood that the first step to truth is to sweep away illusion. Ignorance, when seen clearly, becomes a soil where wisdom can finally grow. But few can bear that humility. We crave the safety of being right. We defend opinions like fortresses, even when those opinions imprison us. Socrates walked freely because he had no fortress to guard. He needed no title, no approval, no victory in debate. He only needed clarity. To admit ignorance is to disarm the ego, and the ego fights back. That's why they mocked him, feared him, and finally condemned him. They couldn't bear a man who showed them how hollow their wisdom really was. He once told his students, "I am wiser than this man, for neither of us knows anything good, but he thinks he knows something when he does not, while I, knowing I know nothing, do not think I know." That is the purest form of freedom, to no longer be enslaved by the need to appear intelligent. For what good is knowledge if it blinds the heart? What good is intellect if it builds pride instead of peace? In our time, we drown in information, yet starve for understanding. We have knowledge at our fingertips, but wisdom nowhere near our hearts. Socrates would have smiled at this, because he knew that ignorance confesses not weakness, it's rebirth. When a man says, "I know nothing," sincerely, the noise of arrogance fades, and in that silence, something beautiful begins. The soul starts to listen. So perhaps the true question is not what do you know, but what are you willing to unlearn? For in unlearning, pride falls and truth enters. That is a secret Socrates died protecting. Wisdom begins only when the illusion of knowing ends. The courtroom smelled of fear. Hundreds gathered, politicians, poets, soldiers, the curious, all waiting to watch a man stand alone against the city he tried to awaken. Socrates stood silent. No lawyer, no written defense, only a calm smile and the fire of truth in his eyes. The judges stared down at him as if he were already guilty, charged with corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods. He was asked, "Socrates, do you deny the charges?" He answered, "I deny nothing. I only ask, what corruption is greater than teaching a man to think for himself?" The crowd murmured. Some sneered. To them, his questions were dangerous. He was a man who replaced comfort with conscience. And in every age, truth-tellers are enemies of comfort. He could have escaped. He could have begged for mercy. But mercy from lies was something Socrates never wanted. He said, "If you offered to let me live on the condition that I stop questioning, I would still refuse. For a life unexamined is not worth living." The air froze. Even his enemies felt the weight of those words. This was not arrogance. It was purity. A man facing death, still loyal to truth, still loyal to the voice within that refused to kneel before fear. His students wept. Plato watched in silence, realizing that courage is not loud. It is steady. It does not shout. It simply does not move. They sentence him to die by hemlock, a poison that burns a soul as it stills a heart. And Socrates accepted it as he accepted every sunrise, with peace. As he lifted the cup, he smiled and said, "To escape death is not difficult, my friends. To escape wrongdoing, that is impossible." He drank, slowly, calmly, like a man returning home after a long journey. That moment was more than a death. It was a mirror for every generation that follows. Will we choose comfort over conscience? Will we silence the truth-tellers to keep our illusions safe? Because the real trial never ended. Dust. It continues in every society, every mind that fears truth. The question still echoes through time. Will you stand for truth, even when truth stands alone? The sun was setting over Athens. Its golden light slipped through the narrow prison window, falling on the quiet figure of an old man. Socrates. He sat cross-legged on a small wooden bed, his hands steady, his eyes gentle. Around him, a few loyal students wept in silence. Plato stood among them, unable to speak. Outside, the city continued, markets buzzing, politicians debating. The same city that had sentenced its wisest man to die. But inside that dim cell, time stood still. One student whispered, "Master, we could help you escape. Others have done it before." Socrates smiled, that same calm, unshakable smile. Escape? And then what? I have spent my life teaching that no harm can come to a good man, neither in life nor in death. Why should I contradict my own truth now? The student wept harder. "But, master, they have treated you unjustly." Socrates looked at him and said softly, "Would you have me repay injustice with injustice? Should I harm the laws of the city because the city harmed me?" Silence filled the room. That was Socrates, a man who refused to poison his own soul, even when the world poisoned his body. The god entered quietly, carrying a small cup. The dark green liquid inside shimmered like death itself. Hemlock. The god trembled. He could not meet Socrates' eyes. Socrates took the cup gently and said, "Do not fear, my friend. You are only giving me what I asked for, the freedom to leave." He raised the cup, looked at his students, and said his final words. "The hour of departure has arrived. I go to die, you go to life. Which of us goes to the better lot, only God knows." He drank, slowly, calmly. The poison began to numb his legs. But he kept speaking, still teaching, still guiding. He told them to take care of their souls, to question everything, to never stop seeking the truth. As the poison reached his heart, he whispered one last request. "Crito, we owe a cock to Asclepius. Pay the debt and do not forget." Even in death, his words carried gratitude, a symbolic thank you for the healing of the soul. Moments later, stillness, but not silence, because from that stillness a new sound began, the whisper of eternity. Plato wept, not because his teacher had died, but because he realized the truth Socrates had lived for, that the soul cannot be killed by poison, nor can truth be buried by law. The man they condemned became the conscience of the world. His death was not an ending. It was an awakening. Every age since then has felt the echo of that cup. Whenever someone chooses integrity over convenience, truth over comfort, courage over silence, that is the immortality of Socrates. His body perished in Athens, but his question lives inside every thinking soul. What is worth dying for, if not the truth itself? After Socrates' death, Athens became quiet. The streets that once laughed now whispered his name. The man they killed was gone, but his question still lived in every corner of the city. His students sat together many nights, remembering his words. Plato once said, "Virtue is the health of the soul." And that is what Socrates had always taught, that the real purpose of life is not to collect things, but to shape the soul. He believed that every soul has a compass, a voice inside that points toward what is right. But when we lie, cheat, or harm others, that compass becomes weak, lost in confusion. He said, "No one does wrong on purpose. They do wrong because they don't truly know what is right. To know what is right, we must know ourselves." That was his secret. That was his truth. Imagine this. You stand in a busy world full of noise, money, opinions, and lies. Everyone wants to look wise, to look powerful. But inside, few people are truly at peace. Socrates wanted people to find that peace, not outside, but within. He said that the soul becomes beautiful when it chooses virtue over victory, truth over comfort, justice over popularity. He did not care about fame or wealth. He cared about honesty, humility, and goodness. That is why he said, "Wealth does not bring goodness, but goodness brings wealth and every other blessing." He believed that virtue, courage, honesty, kindness, and self-control is the only treasure that never dies. It keeps the soul strong, even when the body grows old or weak. So ask yourself, as Socrates once asked his students, are you taking care of your soul? Do your choices make your heart clean or heavy? Do you seek truth or comfort? Because every time you choose what is right, even when no one is watching, you become a philosopher in Socrates' way. He never wanted followers. He wanted thinkers. He wanted you to listen to your own soul. And that, dust, is a meaning of virtue. To live with a clean heart. To be honest when it's hard. To stand by truth when it's lonely. Virtue is not about being perfect. It's about never giving up on goodness. That was Socrates' compass. And if you keep it inside you, no insult, no hate, no failure can ever touch you. Because a person guided by virtue walks in peace, and that peace is stronger than death. Centuries have passed since that day in Athens. The city has changed, the people are gone, but the voice of one man still lives in every honest question ever asked. That voice is Socrates. He left no books, no temples, no monuments, only questions, and those questions built more wisdom than any stone ever could. He taught his students not what to think, but how to think, to question what others accept, to seek truth over comfort, and to never pretend to know what they do not know. That became known as the Socratic method, the art of asking questions that wake the soul. It begins simple. What is justice? What is courage? What is goodness? But as you keep asking, you discover that true knowledge is not about having all the answers. It's about being humble enough to keep learning. Imagine, from one man in the streets of Athens, his ideas reached Plato, then Aristotle, then the hearts of every great thinker after them. From the Roman Stoics to modern philosophers, from classrooms to revolutions, from temples to universities, everywhere people dared to question. Socrates was there, whispering, "Think for yourself. Seek truth, even if it hurts." The unexamined life is not worth living. Today, his legacy is not just in books. It's in every person who dares to speak honestly, who asks why, when everyone else stays silent, whenever a student questions a teacher, whenever a citizen questions a ruler, whenever a soul questions its own beliefs. That is Socrates living again, because truth cannot be killed, and courage cannot be silenced. So, my friend, if you truly want to honor him, don't just remember his words. Live them. Be brave enough to ask questions. Be humble enough to admit what you don't know. And be strong enough to stand by truth, even when you stand alone. That is how the spirit of Socrates continues, not through temples or statues, but through minds that think, and hearts that refuse to lie. As the music fades and the light grows dim, imagine Socrates walking once again through the streets of Athens, barefoot, calm, smiling, still asking questions, still awakening souls. He turns to you and says softly, "Master this, and no insult can touch you." Because when truth is your armor, and virtue is your compass, nothing in this world can harm your soul. The crowd is loud. It always has been. Everyone wants to speak, but few want to think. In the middle of that noise stood one man, calm, silent, and unshaken. Socrates. He didn't shout. He didn't try to win the crowd. He only asked questions. Simple, dangerous, honest questions. They mocked him. They laughed at him in the streets. They called him the corrupter of youth. But still, he smiled, because he knew something they didn't. The truth is not decided by the crowd. Socrates once said, "To find yourself, think for yourself." These words are more powerful than an army, because when you start thinking for yourself, you become free. Every generation has its crowd, the voices that say, "Just follow. Don't question. Don't be different." But if you follow blindly, you will live someone else's life, not your own. Socrates chose the harder road, to stand against ignorance, to stand for truth, even when truth was unpopular. And that, my friend, is what courage really looks like. Not fighting others, but standing alone for what is right. The crowd may silence your voice, but they can never silence your mind. And that's where true freedom begins. There's a kind of prison that has no walls, no bars, no guards. It is the prison of the mind. Most people live there, quietly, unknowingly, locked behind their own beliefs, their fears, their borrowed opinions. Socrates once said, "The greatest freedom is to be a slave to truth alone." He was not talking about kings or chains. He was talking about us, how we let the world tell us what to think, what to believe, what to love, and what to fear. Every time you accept something, without questioning it, you build another wall inside your mind. And soon, you forget what freedom even feels like. Imagine ancient Athens, a city of beauty and pride, filled with marble temples and loud opinions. Everyone is certain. Everyone thinks they are wise. And in the middle of that noise, there stands Socrates, an old man with bare feet and a calm smile. He asks a young man, "Tell me, what is justice?" The crowd laughs, because they think justice is simple. But as Socrates keeps asking questions, the laughter fades, and the silence grows heavier. Because the truth is, they realize they do not know. That is the moment of awakening, the moment when the mind begins to breathe again. Freedom begins when you admit that you might be wrong. Socrates called false knowledge the heaviest chain of all. False words, he said, are not only evil in themselves, but they infect the soul with evil. How many times do we live our lives, guided by what others say, without ever examining why? We inherit opinions like old clothes, beliefs about success, beauty, religion, and truth, and we wear them without ever checking if they fit. But Socrates tore those clothes apart. He questioned everything, not to destroy, but to understand. He knew that the mind, if left unquestioned, becomes its own tyrant. And even today, you and I are not so different. We scroll through endless screens, consuming thoughts that are not ours. We echo what is popular, but rarely what is true. To be free, Socrates would say, is not to think what you are told, but to think for yourself. Thinking freely sounds beautiful, but it comes with a price. Socrates paid it with his life. When he questioned the politicians, they called him dangerous. When he challenged the teachers, they called him disrespectful. And when he inspired the youth to think, they called him corrupt. He could have escaped. He could have apologized, bowed his head, and lived. But he didn't, because for Socrates, a life without truth was not a life worth living. The unexamined life, he said, is not worth living. Those words were not spoken to a crowd. They were spoken to eternity. And here we are, thousands of years later, still repeating them, still trying to understand them. Freedom of the mind begins when you dare to ask the questions that others fear. Freedom is not a war against society. It is a war inside yourself. Every time you choose truth over comfort, you win a small battle for your soul. Every time you refuse to hate, when others tell you to, you take one step closer to freedom. Every time you ask, what if I'm wrong? You break another chain. This was the real revolution of Socrates. Not violence, not rebellion, but awakening. He taught that the human mind is both the jailer and the key. When you understand yourself, your fears, your desires, your limits, you begin to see beyond them. You stop being a prisoner of your past and start becoming a creator of your future. Freedom is not out there. It is in here, in the quiet space between thoughts, where the voice of truth whispers. If Socrates walked through our cities today, he wouldn't see temples or marble statues. He would see phones, screens, and faces lit by blue light. He would ask, are you thinking or are you just reacting? He would walk into schools, offices, parliaments, and social media comment sections, and he would smile sadly, because the same old ignorance still rules. We have technology, but not wisdom. We have information, but not understanding. We have opinions, but not truth. And still, the medicine is the same. Question everything. Freedom of the mind means you stop letting others think for you. You stop needing permission to be yourself. You stop fearing that being different means being wrong. It means you start listening, not to the noise of the crowd, but to the quiet voice of reason within. Socrates called wisdom a lantern in the dark. It does not show you the whole road, only the next step, but that step is enough. Every great thinker, every artist, every reformer, every soul that changed the world carried that same lantern, because freedom of the mind does not mean having all the answers. It means having the courage to keep searching. It means saying, I don't know, but I want to learn. It means being humble enough to grow and strong enough to stand alone. You don't need to be a philosopher to live this way. You only need to be honest. Honest with yourself. Honest about what you know and what you don't. In the last moments of his life, Socrates drank the poison, not with fear, but with peace, because his body could be silenced, but his mind was already free. His friends cried, his students wept, but Socrates smiled. He said, death may be the greatest of all human blessings. He was not talking about dying. He was talking about freedom, the final release from ignorance, the soul's return to truth. And maybe that is what he meant by freedom of the mind, to live without lies, to die without regret, to think without fear, because when your mind is free, no insult can touch you, no loss can break you, and no death can defeat you. Today, the world doesn't ask you to drink poison. It only asks you to stop thinking. And that is the greater danger. So remember, when the world shouts, stay silent. When the world follows blindly, ask why. When the world tries to chain your thoughts, smile, because Socrates taught you the secret. You are free, free to question, free to learn, free to live with truth, even when it hurts. That is the freedom of the mind. And that freedom, once awakened, can never die. You're watching Socratic Spark. If his philosophy sparks something in you, subscribe now and keep the flame of knowledge alive. There is a silence that lives inside every human being, a quiet voice that asks, who am I? Most of us ignore that voice. We fill our days with noise, with the opinions of others, with endless distractions. But one man, 2,000 years ago, decided to listen. His name was Socrates. He did not look for answers in books, nor in temples, nor in the applause of crowds. He looked inside, into the depths of his own soul. Socrates believed that the soul was like a mirror, but most people never clean that mirror. It becomes covered with dust, the dust of pride, of fear, of false beliefs. And when we look into it, We no longer see ourselves. We see what the world has told us to be. Socrates taught his students, "Know thyself." These two words, he said, are the beginning of wisdom, because until you know who you are, you will keep searching for meaning in all the wrong places. One morning, a young man came to Socrates, his eyes full of anger and confusion. "Master," he said, "people insult me, they mock me, they hurt me. How do I stop them?" Socrates smiled gently. He pointed toward a basin of clear water nearby. "Look into it," he said. The young man leaned forward. His reflection trembled with every ripple. Socrates asked, "What do you see?" "My face," said the boy. "And when the water moves?" Socrates asked. "I see nothing clearly," replied the student. "Exactly," said Socrates softly. "When your soul is disturbed by anger, you see nothing clearly. You lose yourself." Then Socrates dipped his hand into the basin and let the water fall calmly again. "When the soul is still," he said, "you can see yourself and truth as they really are." That was the lesson of the mirror, not made of glass, but of the heart. To clean it is to face your fears, your weaknesses, your lies. It is to see yourself, not as others see you, but as you truly are. Socrates once told his students, "The soul takes its color from the thoughts we allow. If your thoughts are full of envy, your soul darkens. If your thoughts are full of truth, it shines." He compared the soul to a garden. If you plant weeds, you cannot expect roses. So he asked the students every day, "What did you think today? What did you feed your soul?" Because freedom of mind, he said, is not possible without purity of soul. And that's where true wisdom begins. Not in knowing everything, but in seeing yourself clearly. The sun was rising slowly over the marble city. The streets were quiet, except for the gentle sound of sandals on stone. A young student named Glaucon walked toward the garden, where Socrates sat waiting beneath an olive tree. Socrates was holding a small clay cup of water. His eyes looked calm, as if he could see through the morning air itself. Glaucon bowed and said, "Master, I have come again, but I am troubled. I have studied logic, I have read the poets. Yet still, I do not understand what truth is. Is truth something we can see, or only something we can feel?" Socrates smiled and said quietly, "My dear Glaucon, truth is like sunlight. You cannot hold it in your hands. But without it, you cannot see anything at all." Glaucon frowned, puzzled. "Then how do I find it?" he asked. "By cleaning the mirror of your soul," said Socrates. "For the truth is not outside you. It is reflected within you." Socrates stood and walked slowly toward a pool of still water. "Look," he said, pointing to the reflection of the sky in the water. "What do you see?" "The sky," Glaucon answered. "And if I stir the water?" Socrates asked. Touching the surface with his finger, the reflection broke into waves, the image of the sky trembling and vanishing. "Now," said Socrates, "the sky has not changed. Only your reflection has." He turned toward his student and said softly, "This is how our minds work. When our soul is disturbed by anger, jealousy, or fear, we cannot see truth, even when it stands before us. To see clearly, you must calm the storm inside." Glaucon said, "But master, how do I calm the storm? How can a man stop anger or silence fear?" Socrates looked at him gently and said, "By questioning it. Question my fear." Glaucon asked. "Yes," said Socrates, "ask your fear what it wants to protect. Ask your anger what it is hiding. Ask your desire what it truly seeks. When you question your thoughts, you take away their power. They become your students, not your masters." He smiled. The soul that does not question remains a slave to its emotions. Glaucon listened in silence, his eyes reflecting the golden morning light. After a long pause, Socrates said, "Close your eyes, Glaucon." Glaucon obeyed. "Now," said Socrates, "imagine your soul as a mirror, but it is covered with dust." "What kind of dust?" asked Glaucon softly. "The dust of pride," said Socrates. The dust of lies, the dust of pretending to be wise when you are not. He continued, now imagine cleaning that mirror, not with water, but with honesty. When you admit your ignorance, you wipe away one layer. When you forgive someone, you clear another. When you speak truth, even when it hurts, you polish the surface. And when the mirror becomes clean, he whispered, you will see the divine light within, your true self. Glaucon opened his eyes slowly. He felt something strange, a quiet peace he had never known before. He said, Master, I feel lighter, as if a weight has fallen from my heart. Socrates smiled. That is the weight of illusion, my friend. The heaviest burden is not made of stone, but of false beliefs. He pointed to the rising sun. See that light? It does not come from the sky alone. It also comes from within you. Every soul has its own sunrise, but only those who clean the mirror can see it. Glaucon looked thoughtful. He asked, Master, if truth is within me, why do so few people find it? Socrates walked a few steps, his robe brushing the dust of the earth. Then he turned and said, because most people fear silence. They fear what they might hear in their own hearts. He paused, then added, they seek truth in temples, in gold, in power. But the truth hides behind simplicity. The louder the world becomes, the softer the soul speaks. He looked at his student kindly. Glaucon, wisdom is not knowing more things. It is needing fewer things. The morning had turned to day. The birds sang in the olive trees. Socrates sat again beneath the shade, and Glaucon sat beside him. Socrates said, remember this, my student. Every man has two mirrors, one that shows his face, and one that shows his soul. He lifted his cup and continued, people spend their lives fixing their face, but forget to polish their soul. Glaucon smiled faintly. Then I must begin polishing, master. Socrates laughed softly. Begin? My friend, you already have. The moment you questioned yourself, you took the first step toward truth. He looked to the sky and said, one day, when the world forgets me, these words will still live. Know thyself. Because the man who knows himself can never be enslaved, not by kings, not by fear, not even by death. In the silence of his soul, Socrates found the truth that no teacher could give. He taught not with books, but with questions. He changed not the world outside, but the world within. And in every age, when a human being dares to ask, who am I, truly? The voice of Socrates whispers again, from the depths of time, clean your mirror. The truth is waiting within. There is a kind of silence that does not come from the absence of sound, but from the presence of truth. It is a silence that filled the prison cell of Socrates on the night before his death. He knew that at sunrise he would drink the poison, and yet there was no fear on his face, only peace. A student asked him, Master, are you not afraid? Socrates smiled faintly. He touched his chest and said, how can I fear when I have lived truthfully? Death only ends a body, not the soul that knows itself. He looked around at his students, their eyes full of tears, and whispered, do not cry for me. Cry for those who live without ever knowing who they are. Socrates believed that inside every soul burns a small flame, the flame of truth. Most people let it die, blown out by fear, greed, or the desire to please others. But those who protect it, those who feed it with honesty and reflection, they become light for others. That is why he said, the greatest way to live with honor is to be what we pretend to be. It means, don't wear masks. Don't act wise. Be wise. Don't speak truth. Live truth. Socrates knew that truth always comes with a price. But he also knew the cost of ignorance is far greater. He chose truth, even when it meant death. And as the poison reached his heart, his final words were not of regret, but of gratitude. He thanked the gods for a life well examined. That was the mirror, clear, unbroken, shining till the very end. Today, we live in a world of mirrors, but none that show our souls. We see our reflections in screens, in photos, in opinions, But rarely do we stop and ask, what do I truly believe? What kind of person am I becoming? Socrates would walk into our world today and see people connected by technology, yet divided inside. He would ask us the same question he asked the Athenians: are you taking care of your soul? Because he knew, if the soul is lost, everything else, power, fame, beauty, means nothing. The mirror of the soul still waits for us. It does not ask for perfection. It only asks for honesty. In the end, the message of Socrates is simple, but eternal. The unexamined life is not worth living. To live examined is to question what you believe, to stand for truth even when alone, to listen to the voice within when the world is shouting outside. It is to keep your soul clean, to polish the mirror again and again until it reflects light instead of darkness. Socrates is gone, his body turned to dust, but his flame, that inner fire, still burns wherever a person dares to think for themselves. If you want to honor Socrates, don't build a statue. Don't memorize his words. Live his question. Look within. Ask yourself each day, am I true to my soul? Because that is where freedom lives. Not in wealth, not in power, but in clarity of heart. And when you find that peace, no insult can touch you. No opinion can shake you. No death can frighten you. You will walk through life like Socrates, calm, clear, unbreakable. To see yourself clearly is to be reborn every day. And so, the man who questioned everything, questioned even death itself. Socrates lived not as a hero, but as a mirror. He showed every person what they truly are, not through anger, but through truth. When the city condemned him, he did not curse his judges. He did not beg for mercy. He drank the cup of poison with steady hands, because he had already found freedom. Freedom inside his own soul. He taught us that wisdom is not knowing many things. It is knowing yourself. It is standing for truth even when the whole world mocks you. It is finding peace, not from what others say, but from who you choose to be. The unexamined life, he said, is not worth living. But those who dare to examine, they begin to truly live. Socrates' questions were not meant to end in ancient Athens. They were meant to echo through centuries, through minds, through us. Every time you stop and ask yourself, why do I believe this? Oh, am I living truthfully? In that moment, Socrates lives again. Today, we live in a world full of voices. Everyone speaks, but few think. Everyone wants to be right, but few want to be wise. And yet, the same truth still waits quietly. Freedom begins not in rebellion, but in reflection. Peace begins not in control, but in understanding. So, what can we learn from the man who chose truth? Over life, that no insult can touch the soul that knows itself. That no opinion can shake the one who lives with clarity. That no fear can conquer the mind that is awake. Socrates' final gift was not his death. It was his courage to die for truth, and his peace in knowing who he was. Let that be our mirror too. To question, to seek, to live with honesty, and to keep the flame of wisdom alive. In a world that fears reflection, to know yourself is to be untouchable. This was just one spark of wisdom, but there's so much more ahead. Join the journey. Subscribe to Socratic Spark, and let philosophy guide your path to success.